Well, so now that we've established our icy water area by creating an iceberg, let's add some whales in this area. Now, many species of whales live in cold, icy waters, and they come in lots of different shapes and sizes. And you can create whatever kind of whale you would like for your piece. But I'm going to work on something called a narwhal. A narwhal is a very interesting looking whale because it's got this long horn type thing sticking out of the front of it, and I'll tell you a little bit more about a narwhal in a little bit. And I'm not doing a realistic narwhal, I'm doing a very simplified version of a narwhal. So I've created this really elongated oval in a light gray, which is the color of narwhals, and they most of the world's narwhals live in the Canadian Arctic, so I feel very connected to them because of that. But if you don't feel a connection to narwhal and you would like to do some other kind of whale with some other shape, then please feel free to do that. I'll show you a few different shapes of whales as well, but I just wanted to show you this really simple shape that I'm using here. So I cut out that oval shape for the body, and that's all I've cut out from cloth. And the rest of it I'm going to create with stitch. So I'm starting out by just using an overcast stitch, much like I did with the iceberg, to secure this kind of oval blob shape for the body of my narwhal onto the background cloth. So the background cloth that I have is this dark purpley blue color, and I intentionally put a light colored whale on top of that. The narwhal body is very light gray, so it will show up against the dark background. If my background was light colored, then I would want to create a dark colored whale. Now, after I've sewn down the body, what I'm doing here now is I'm using a kind of a stretched out fly stitch, and I'm going over it a few times to create a lower fin there on my narwhal. And the reason I'm going over a few times is so that there's no background showing through. So I've done two fly stitches, and then I'm going to go right into the middle of the fly stitch and cover up any of the background that's still showing, so that fin looks fairly solid looking. And then I'll continue stitching around my narwhal body so until I get to the end, and then I'll create a tail again using a combination of a chain stitch or a fly stitch to start out with, and then a series of blanket stitches to create a fanned out tail, and I'll do each side separately. So this could easily have been cut out of a little triangle of cloth and sewn on, but I thought I would give this a try just doing it with stitch, and I apologize that it's way off in the corner. I'm not really sure why, but hopefully you can see enough to get an idea of what these stitches look like. So each side is a mirror image of the other side. So the first stitch is a little chain stitch, or it could even be a fly stitch, which is like an open-ended chain stitch, and then made the fan a little bit wider by doing a series of blanket stitches to fan that little tail out. And it's all right, it's not great, and I think I did a similar thing when we were doing the mermaids. And it's okay, it's not great, but I might work on it a bit more later, but I don't, yeah, not sure, we'll see. But this is what I'm going to leave for now, because it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to look pristine and perfect. And now that I've done the tail, I'll just go all the way around till the whole body is secured, and I've still got some thread left, and my thread is a slight contrast with the color off my narwhal, so I'm just going to do some little stitches back and forth along the top area here of the narwhal, because if you look at a picture of a narwhal, they look rather modelly, so that's what I'm creating with these stitches, just mainly because I've got some thread left over. And the thread too, I chose the thread color so that it contrasts with the background. Doesn't necessarily need to contrast with the body of my narwhal here, but it does need to contrast with the background so that you can see the fin and the tail there. Now, after I finish doing this, I'm going to create that horn that sticks out off the front end of the narwhal. I had considered including a narwhal in the month that we were looking at myths and legends, but it didn't end up happening. So I definitely wanted to include it here. These are real animals. They look very unusual, but they are real animals, and they are the creature that supposedly was the origin of the legend of the unicorns. So now I'm going to attach that horn off the front, and I've chosen this kind of fun white, bright white yarn that has kind of sparkly little tufts of hair sticking out. And I'm using that because, if it was the original inspiration for the mythical unicorn, I thought there should be some sparkle and glitter here. So what I'm doing is that piece of yarn is actually probably too thick to sew through. So I'm using what's called a couching stitch. I'm just laying that white piece of yarn on top of my fabric, and then I'm stitching around it with a light blue, and it doesn't matter. I'm just going to sort of secure it down, and I'm going to go around and around and around really close to the yarn, but over and around and around and around, so it creates like a spiral looking effect, a rope like looking effect, which I think is a really good looking effect for a unicorn horn, don't you think? And if you've watched the videos about the myths and legends, you'll know that there are a lot of these myths were the result of sailors telling tall tales. And so they brought back these horns and then told people that they were unicorn horns. And so there's what my narwhal looks like in the end. And so now I decided to do another whale, and this one is an orca. It's another very Canadian whale. And the way that I'm creating this orca, there is the body, which is kind of like this little teardrop shape. Then there's a little triangular fin on the back and another triangle for a tail, and then another little side fin, and it's bicolored, it's black and white. They're very playful whales, and you can create these little teardrops in different orientations, and it looks like they're quite fun animals, I think. And so they like to kind of, I guess, do the aquatic version of gambling and galloping around, playfully playing in the sea. And as you can see, I've already done one of these, one orca there. And so now I'm going to stitch this other orca. And admittedly, I am just using little scraps of cloth that had been already cut to actually pretty close to a perfect shape there. But you could certainly cut out a teardrop-like shape or a variation of a teardrop-like shape to create your orca if you like. Or as I said before, you don't have to do these whales. If they don't speak to you, then don't do them. And so I've cut this shape out in black. And again, I'm just sewing it down. And I've chosen to, yes, I know, cover up part of my iceberg. And the reason for that is my background water is quite dark, and the black orca doesn't show up so well against the really dark background, but it does show up against the lighter background where the iceberg is. So I made the decision to cover up part of the stitching that I'd done for the iceberg so that my orcas will show up a little bit more. And if you notice the one that's already done, it has a bit of a white outline around the dark parts so that the black will show up even more. And it's kind of like what I would do if I were drawing or painting the orca. I would create a lighter area around it so that it shows up more, and I did that with stitch rather than with paint. So this one here, I'm also putting right on top of the white area. Now I'm cutting out the triangle for the fin there. And I'm going to tuck it in. I haven't sewn quite all the way around. I'm going to tuck that little bit in. And are these proportions realistic? No, not at all. Do I care? No, not at all. It is the suggestion of an orca, and I think that they are pretty convincing looking. So I don't mind that the fin is not the right size because it can be swimming in, swimming out, is curled around, and now once all the black pieces are attached, now I'm going to create that white underbelly, and I'm using a little piece of lace. I cut out a little piece of lace net curtain there, a pretty dense part, so it's pretty dark, and then I'm going to stitch that on using white thread this time to create the white underbelly. And now this is an interesting thing because the orca is black and white, so that white underbelly will show up really well against the dark background. So I've actually positioned this particular orca so that the underbelly, the white part, is going to show up against the dark background, and the dark part of the orca is going to be silhouetted against the light iceberg. So that was a little bit of planning ahead on my part. I didn't do that so well for the first one, but I thought about it a little bit more for the second one, which is sometimes the benefit of doing more than one. You realize you know, when you're working on the first one, you think, oh, well, if I were going to do this again, I would do whatever differently. And then if you make another one, it gives you the opportunity to actually do that differently. And once that little bit is sewn on, I'm creating another little patch of white up higher up on my orca's head there, just using a chain stitch, a detached chain stitch, and I'm going over it twice just to make it a little bit more prominent. And that's it. That's how easy it is to create a pretty cool looking orca, little baby orca, my little pod of orcas there in front of the whales in the background. And I've been working on a couple of other different kinds of whales as well. There are these large blue ones that are sperm whale like, I guess. And then these white ones, I was thinking that they might be belugas. So I'm going to still be doing some more work on them. But I just wanted to show you that you can do all kinds of different shapes for whales. And that's it for this section. Once again, happy stitching, and I will see you again soon. Bye for now.